Sales Conversion Part 2. So let's look at Part 2 of our first meeting. Part 1 of the meeting was really about connecting and consulting, but now we can move into convincing and closing for a second or subsequent meeting, whatever the next action is. As we mentioned before, closing for a second meeting is everything that the first meeting is about, and you start with it at the beginning of the meeting. If today's meeting goes well, I would like the opportunity to come back, present a proposal, go through our prices, and see if then that might be something you would think is a value add to your business. A second meeting agenda might look something like this. Maybe not as complex as this, but these are the key points. Start off with your introduction, regain rapport, clear objectives for you and your prospect. Perhaps a quick recap of the first meeting. Ask if anything has changed, if time has passed. Present your cost categories as A, B or C, bronze, silver and gold. 1 or 2 categories, 3 or 4, 5 or 6. Give them a choice of options, not just you versus not you. Talk about the projected savings and the benefits that would come from that and the difference of using ERA. Remind them of the 4-step process, emphasizing that they won't need a great deal of time in that project. The expertise is different than they would have, and it would actually create an extension of the time and resources they currently devote to supplier management and cost reduction. Make sure that you walk through the CEL, client engagement letter, clearly and precisely, but not over explaining. Pause and allow the prospect to ask you questions and concerns. And then finally, close the sale, or if that's not appropriate, close for the next step, which could be more research, an action plan, or a subsequent meeting with others involved from the client company. I've given you some demonstrations of previous definitions and examples. I'm going to do another one in a moment when we close for the sale. First of all, let's think about answering their questions and concerns. This is one of the key aspects of being ready, of preparation. Not just what you're going to say, but knowing and anticipating what questions and objections and concerns they will have. One of the most powerful ways of dealing with one is to not answer the concern, but instead embed it in this process. Acknowledge their point, thank them for it, repeat it back, and empathise. Probe with a few questions, ideally TED or high impact questions, or just questions that really help you to clarify what the issues are. Now, if you can answer the question, answer it. If you can't, create an action plan. Or, and this is a big or, leave it on the table as a reason to come back at the next meeting. Even if you can answer it, use it as a reason or another benefit for a second meeting. Does that answer your question? Would that be okay? Get a confirmation and a tie down. So let's put it into context. The prospect asks you if you've got a client or a customer who is in a similar industry to them, where you have saved them costs around their chemical usage. Now, very specific, very specialist. So you will acknowledge this. Thank you for asking. That's a very good point. Do we have any client projects, similar business to yours, where we've cost reduced chemicals? I can understand why that's important to you. What sort of business definition, how broad would that be? If we can't get any, if I can't put my hands on a case study for that chemicals, what's more important, the chemical cost categories or the industry sector? Now, the answer might be something like, well, I'm sure we do have somewhere in our history examples of working with a paint manufacturer similar to yours. Whether we've got the actual chemicals or not, I'm not sure. But if you will let me, I would like to look into that and present that information back at the next time we meet. Let me make a note of that so that I don't forget. Would that be okay? Very straightforward, but it gets the purpose and the focus on the next meeting. Acknowledge, probe, answer, confirm. Try and memorize this and practice with some of the typical objections, questions or concerns you'll get. Another one, this is great for very simple or less heavyweight objections or concerns, is feel, felt, found. Well, we just don't really have time at the moment. We've got so many other things going on in the business. I don't think we could cope with another project. Well, I understand how you feel. Many businesses today are facing a lot of pressure and a lot of drain on resources from managing the COVID and all the issues that go with that. To be honest, many clients I've spoken to have felt exactly the same at this stage. But what they found is working with ERA is not a time-consuming activity. We really are as independent and autonomous as we say we are. So once the project is up and running, we can really take care of ourselves without a lot of supervision or interaction with you and your team. I understand how you feel. Other clients have felt the same way, but what they found was, just make sure that it's not too obvious when you're using this and it's nice and conversational. Now, buying signals can happen at any time in the first meeting. They're often relatively subtle, but they don't always have to be. You might have someone say, yeah, I can see this is a really good idea. I can see where this would fit into our business really well. Now that's a buying signal. Just general air of agreement is also a buying signal. Here are 3 things to really pay attention to. When they're asking you questions, see if the context changed from if to when. Who would you need to get involved with? What kind of data would you need? How long would it take you? What involvement would you need? Would you always change suppliers, or could we keep some of the supply chain we have? So these kind of questions are now indicating the client, the prospect, is really thinking forward about this. A change of energy, perhaps being more relaxed, more humorous, more kind of jovial perhaps. They've just let their guard down very slightly. Difficult, or rather more difficult to tell online, where the body language is much condensed, but certainly still noticeable. And then involving of others, either bringing them into the meeting that you're currently holding, or indicating that they would like other people to be involved in the next meeting. And in fact, I would encourage this. So if you ask it during the conversation, the first meeting conversation, or an early meeting, and say, when we come back together again next time for our second meeting, I will probably bring somebody with me, one of our cost category specialists. Are there any stakeholders or members of your team you would like to bring in as well? It shows confidence, by the way, when you do that. So closing is a kind of a bit of a controversial topic amongst non-sales people. It's important to remember it's about timing, not just a technique. Knowing when to ask a closing question is as important as knowing how to ask a closing question. And there are many different ways of gaining commitment through questions. Here are just 3 examples. You can use a direct, assumptive and assertive close. You can summarize some of the benefits or points and ask an alternative choice close, or you can just simply state it as a next step and sell it as a process. And many people will work to a process. So let me give you some examples, and let's imagine that we are closing for a second meeting. And this is a very important principle, by the way. Only sell to the next stage. If you're not asking the client to sign a CEL, then don't close for the commitment to ERA. Close for a commitment to the next step, which in this case, example, is a second meeting. So from what you've told me today, I definitely think we could provide you some more information. I'd like to go away and estimate what we think the savings are in these three categories and come back next week with a plan, a proposal, and some pricing. Would that be okay? Now, that's pretty direct, it's pretty assertive, and it's pretty assumptive. But that gets results. Benefit summary and alternative choice might go something like this. I would like to go away and talk to one of my specialists and get them to highlight where we think the savings and how much the savings would be, so I can go through that in our next meeting, perhaps sometime next week, maybe Wednesday or Thursday. How is your diary looking then? The next step. Well, the next step from me is to get a little bit of information from you, compare that to what maybe your competitors or others in the market are paying for these costs, and then come back and present that to you next week. This is just a normal next step. Would that be okay? If the meeting goes ahead, great. And you're on to the next meeting and the next meeting and the next meeting. One of the things that happens is, of course, meetings stall. Sales do not progress as well as you would like them to. So you need to have a follow-up system, what I call organized persistence. Put them into a CRM, call, email, message, telephone, once a month at the minimum, maybe slightly more often. Don't pitch, have a conversation. How are things going with you? We spoke last time. Have you had any more thoughts on this? I'd very much like to arrange a next meeting if it's appropriate. Always keep the door open, but always keep focused on getting that next step meeting. One of the biggest challenges or objections you'll encounter is the I'd like to think about it. And of course, being polite, customer-focused consultants, you will say, yes, of course, I keep in touch. But maybe there's a way of being a little more persuasive. Empathise. I understand this is not a simple thing to simply rush into. I'd want to give it more consideration if I were you. However, can I ask you directly, when people say they want to think about it, there's usually three things at the back of their mind. That 50% success fee is quite a lot of money, 24 months as a period of time is a concern, or they do not believe we can find the savings that I maintain we can find. Can I ask you which of those three is your biggest concern that you'd like to think about? The fee, the timescale, or the fact we can find the savings? Now, by asking this question, they may pick one of these three, in which case you have a chance of solving it, answering it, or discussing it, if nothing else. Or they may say, no, it's just that I'm concerned about upsetting our existing procurement team. Now you have what is known as the final point objection. All right, so then you can move into an objection handling process to deal with that. But we're slipping outside of the sales conversion model that I'm talking about here. The conversion from first to second meetings ideally should be 100%. Realistically, we're probably looking at 80%. The conversion from proposals or presenting a CL in a second, third or fourth meeting is currently about 1 in 5. There's no reason why that shouldn't be 1 in 4 or 1 in 3 with a little, shall we say, sharpening of the pencil. So make sure that your closing skills are clear, specific and confident. I am 100% confident we can deliver real savings without risk and work together very well indeed. However, before we discuss the next step, what questions or concerns do you have, if any? And you draw out these last few concerns and make sure that you get that second meeting. The second meeting doesn't mean you're going to get a sale, but without a second meeting, a sale is a very distant possibility. When you're closing for that meeting, here is a quick checklist. Listen out for agreements and positives. Confirm them when they happen. Summarize the points. Invite questions and comments. Ask for the meeting, be clear on the next steps, and confirm the date and time while you're in the meeting or online. Let's just remind ourselves of some of the unforced errors that happened in the first meeting. Make sure that none of these happen very often to you. Keep this list to mind. And the last two are probably the most important and the most difficult to overcome if you miss them, but the easiest to achieve and avoid. Always ask for a second meeting, and as I said on the first video, do that in the first 3 minutes and do it again at the end. But make sure you've sold the benefits of a second meeting, not the benefits of expense reduction analysts, but why the client should give you and hopefully a few of their colleagues an hour of your time. What will they learn? What will they gain? What will be the purpose of that meeting? If you have any questions at all about this or any other topics, please drop me an email at gphelps@expense reduction analysts.